This episode of Food Psych is brought to you by my book, Anti-Diet, Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating, which is now available wherever books are sold. Just go to christyharrison.com/book to get it. Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, health at every size, body liberation, and taking down diet culture. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm an anti-diet registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and author of the book, Anti-Diet. Join me here every week as I talk with fellow anti-diet advocates about their journeys toward peace with food and their bodies. And by the way, on this show, we bleep out diet culture stuff like weight and calorie numbers, but we don't censor swear words or other adult language, so listener discretion is advised.
Anti-diet revolution, we're for health at every size. Eat the foods you like. Food Psych.
Hey there, welcome to episode 234 of Food Psych. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and today I'm talking with fellow Health at Every Size dietitian Veronica Garnett about how weight stigma in dietetics affected her health and her career, the emotional effects of restriction, the importance of representation and community in finding body liberation, how she's finally realizing her childhood dream of hosting a cooking show, and so much more. I can't wait to share our conversation with you in just a moment. But first, I do want to just give a quick content warning for this episode because there's a brief mention of domestic violence and also a description of being weight stigmatized at a job interview. There aren't any graphic details or anything, but I just wanted to flag that in case either of those topics are hard for you to hear about right now when stress levels are really high for everyone overall. And if so, you can always just wait to listen to the interview portion of this episode until you feel ready. Speaking of everyone's stress levels being high, I also just wanted to say a few words about the whole COVID-19 situation, which at the time of this recording is feeling, frankly, scarier than ever. I don't know where we'll be by the time you hear this because things move so quickly with this pandemic, and I have to record these intros 2 weeks ahead of time to allow time for my team members to edit and transcribe the episode. So who knows where things will be when you hear this, but I wanted to share some thoughts that are coming up for me in this moment. It's really becoming increasingly clear to me through the lives that are being tragically lost and the people sharing about that on news reports and social media that fitness and quote-unquote wellness really don't protect people from this disease. COVID-19 doesn't care about how thin you are. It doesn't care about how quote-unquote clean you eat or how often you work out. It doesn't care about any of that wellness stuff, that diet culture stuff. News reports of younger folks dying are coming out every day, saying things like, he was so healthy, she did X amount of exercise per week, etc. Exercise and quote-unquote healthy eating are really not the prevention or cure they're made out to be. We talk about this all the time on the podcast with the wellness diet, but we're really seeing a stark example of this now with this pandemic situation. And diet culture's pressure to exercise and eat a certain way only adds to the stress we're all feeling right now. And right now, we're really in the middle of a crisis where, for lots of different reasons, many people just don't have access to or the mental energy to procure quote-unquote whole foods or exercise. And it's far more important right now to do the things that are actually immediately effective against this virus. I know I've said it before, but I'll say it again. Don't worry if you're not able to exercise or eat vegetables right now. And don't worry if your eating is weird, if you're eating more than usual, you're eating at weird times, whatever. Do whatever you need to do to take care of your mental health while you're socially distancing. And just know that eating or moving your body in certain ways won't save us. But taking the precautions that we know to be effective just might. And those precautions are social distancing, using lots of soap and hand sanitizer, cleaning products for household surfaces, and the proper protective equipment. Those are the things we need to focus on. Those are the things that we know work. So please keep staying home if you're staying home, unless you're an essential worker, in which case, thank you so much for everything you're doing. Keep washing your hands frequently. Keep cleaning frequently touched surfaces daily. keep staying at least 6 feet away from anyone outside your household if you go to the grocery store or go for a walk. Cover your cough or sneeze with a tissue or a shirt sleeve. Wear a mask if you think you're sick. And just be an all-around good citizen to protect the people around you. Let's all continue to take care of ourselves and each other throughout this pandemic and get rid of oppressive, magical thinking beliefs about quote-unquote wellness once and for all, because clearly those are not the things we need right now. I'll be back to answering your questions next week, so if you want to submit your own question for a chance to have it answered on an upcoming episode, go to christyharrison.com/questions. That's christyharrison.com/questions. And then this is the part where I usually tell you that if you want to ask me multiple questions and have me answer them every month, you can join my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals. And the course really is a great resource for members during this time of uncertainty, both because it gives you hours and hours of content to dive into while you're maybe off work and have more time on your hands and need some support, and also because it has an awesome community forum where you get to connect with other people who are taking the course, supporting each other and, helping each other through this pandemic. And my team and I are in there as well, helping support you. But I know right now might not be the time for a lot of you, and I'm in this boat too, having had my husband lose his job. It's not necessarily the time to be making a bigger investment right now. So I wanted to share a couple other resources that I offer that are free or lower cost if you're in a situation of not being able to afford more. First, I have a free audio guide called 7 Simple Strategies for Finding Peace and Freedom with Food, which you can get when you join my email list at christyharrison.com/strategies. That's christyharrison.com/strategies. And when you join my email list, you'll also automatically get a free 4-day mini course to help you make peace with food and break free from the life thief that is diet culture. So if you go to christyharrison.com/strategies and sign up, you'll get all of that. And then if you want to go deeper, I have a 5-day mini course called A Taste of Intuitive Eating that helps you take the first steps on the path to peace with food. It covers how to recognize and fight back against the diet mentality, how to use self-compassion as one of the most powerful tools in healing your relationship with food, how to start untangling your self-worth from how you eat and how your body looks or how you move, and more. The mini course has journal activities and prompts for each of the 5 days. And then at the end, you also get the option of continuing on to the Intuitive Eating Fundamentals course at a special savings. You can learn more about the mini course and sign up at christyharrison.com/mini course. That's christyharrison.com/mini course. And then the final resource I want to share is my book, Anti-Diet: Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating, which is now available wherever books are sold. And please buy online for now so that you stay safe. This book is a great companion to the podcast because it goes into depth about diet culture and the ways that it harms us, with hundreds of scientific references and resources to help you deepen your understanding of these ideas and start making peace with food in your body. Just go to christyharrison.com/book to get it, and consider ordering it from your local independent bookstore if they do delivery or shipping, because small businesses are really hurting right now. That's christyharrison.com/book. And if you've read the book already and loved it, as I know quite a few people listening have done, thank you so much. And I would be so grateful if you could take a moment to leave an Amazon review and mark all the other 5-star reviews as helpful. You can also do this on Goodreads if you're a member of Goodreads. Those positive reviews help more people discover the book, which helps grow the anti-diet movement overall and ultimately helps make the world a safer place for people of all shapes and sizes, including the very largest sizes. So thank you so much for reading the book if you have, or for planning to read the book if you haven't already. And I'm so grateful for all of you listening, now more than ever in these uncertain times. And now, without any further ado, let's go to my conversation with Veronica Garnett. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
Growing up, I guess in my early childhood, I remember having a pretty normal, or whatever normal means, but a pretty normal relationship with food. And I remember there being a lot of pleasure associated with food. I was not a picky eater, and it wasn't like there weren't many rules around food, like what we should and shouldn't eat. Some of the things that I remember eating as a kid, like one of my favorite snacks was Ritz crackers with Jif peanut butter, like making little sandwiches out of them. But also, like, my dad, like, he grew up in Kentucky. He grew up poor in Kentucky. And so, like, some of the some of the foods, like the foods that he would eat or make for me and my sister on the occasional occasions that he did were like very rich and had a lot of mouthfeel and stuff. Like he would make like fried bologna sandwiches, or if he would make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, he would like toast the peanut butter like with butter, like regular butter, and then peanut butter and jelly on top of that. Or we'd have like these Danish rings that we would like microwave, and there's always like a lot of butter and like rich stuff. I remember eating like peanut M&Ms and just eating like a lot of like what I liked, and there wasn't like any concerns around food. But I think in order to like really, yeah, I have to give context to what was going on like with the in my household. I think laid a foundation. The pleasure was one thing that was great, but yeah, I would say that I grew up in a household that was pretty volatile. At least when my parents were married. I know that, I don't think my mom would say it in these words, but when I look back on it now as an adult and as a woman who spent years in therapy, that relationship between my parents was one of like domestic violence. Like my father, I mean, I had seen my father hit my mother, even if it didn't happen every day. It was still like this is the house that me and my sister were growing up in. Yeah, there was a lot of arguing and fighting. And then also, like, my parents were on paper, we looked like it was very Cosby Show-esque. My father was a lawyer, my mother was a college professor, very educated, high achieving people. And like, we lived in a single family brownstone in Harlem, had 4 floors and a basement. And but my parents were professionals. So like a lot of times dinner, I know at least like Monday through Thursdays, we'd have, babysitters pick us up from school. So whatever snacks, it's like the babysitters didn't stop us from eating whatever. And a lot of times it was dinner, it was like whatever they prepared, spaghetti and meat sauce. But like we didn't sit down, as a family, and like there was no tension or strife around that, which was like really interesting. But one of the things that I've had to process in therapy, amongst all of those things, that household that I grew up in, was that like my sister and I like never ate breakfast. It's like my mom, even though my parents were married, she was pretty much like a single parent taking care of us. And even when my parents were married, my father wasn't really engaged and like never helped out in the mornings and getting us to school, getting us ready for school. And so we just never, it was, I mean, if growing up in New York City, my mom had a car, so she'd have to get up to move the car and then come back and, make sure, then finding a spot, in the morning is crazy.
Oh, it's the worst. I know it well.
Yeah. And then, she had to make sure we got dressed and got our hair done, and little Black girls and hair, it's a big thing, and get us to school. And then my mom, that whole time, we went to school, lived and went to school in Harlem, and my mom worked in New Jersey. So she would have to do all of this stuff in the morning to get us ready. And then at one point, my sister and I only a year and a half apart, but we were going to 2 different schools. So she'd have to take us to 2 different schools, then get to New Jersey. Like it was just a lot for her. And so I think that was something that slipped through the cracks. So there was this like unintentional restriction of food because in the mornings we're not eating. So then at lunch and snack time and dinner, we're compensating for not getting that nourishment in the morning. And then thankfully, my parents eventually divorced when I was 9. Then my mom like went from being, married and somewhat partnered, even though she was pretty much a single parent then, but then to being completely a single parent. And so also I know that, she was in academia on the tenure track. And that's very challenging for Black women of color in that setting. So it's like she's having to fight at work, having to care for, now some preteens, and the food stuff just ended up kind of being afterthought. So the not eating breakfast continued. And I know that by the time I got to middle school, a lot of times I remember we wouldn't have breakfast or lunch. We wouldn't have lunch packed. My sister and I, we didn't work. My mom's whole thing was, we should get our lesson, do well in school. So it's not like we worked to make our own money to then buy food. And like we didn't get an allowance necessarily.
So you didn't have money to buy food at the cafeteria either. So it was like you would have had to pack your lunch.
Right. And like sometimes maybe we would have some cash here and there. And like sometimes like if they had a snack table, I remember I'll just keep it on me instead of we, but I'm sure my sister had similar experience. But like maybe we would buy snacks or have something at lunchtime, but a lot of times we wouldn't. A lot of times I would just skip going to the cafeteria and maybe go to the school library and just sit. And I just remember in middle school, a lot of mornings or yeah, just had like my stomach growling and having the anxiety about that, like in a quiet classroom and your stomach is growling. And I'm like amazed now, like looking back on it, how well like I did academically, considering all that was, all that was happening. And like the stuff that was happening, like the not having food or money is not because like we weren't poor. I had a very pretty middle class existence, but I think it was just things get lost in the sauce. So I just remember that unintentional restriction, and then just like when it came to eating, I would eat whatever I wanted and whatever I enjoyed. The relationship with food, I think, was pretty normal, all things considered. But I think maybe more so, the issue for me may have been more so like my relationship with my body. And I was 5 since I was fat, or at least that's the first time I realized that I was a fat kid. And actually, I remember it like so vividly. I was in kindergarten. I was standing in line, like it was a Monday, and we were standing in line like to meet with the teacher or to have our teacher like review our homework from over the weekend. And I remember it vividly. Like my teacher, I think she patted me on the belly and she made a comment about like, "Oh, you ate too many of my Ritz crackers and peanut butter." So, like she said, I ate too many of those like over the weekend.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So it was like all of a sudden, like, oh my God, I'm fat. I'm like, what? For me, I don't think I ever put the two and two. Like what I ate is what caused me to be in a larger body as a kid. I was still gonna eat what I wanted to eat. But then I just now I had this extra layer of being like self-conscious about my body. And then also when you are living in a household that's volatile and there's emotional trauma and stuff like that, I think there's more of an issue about feeling safe in my body, yeah, than anything else.
And of course, they sort of compound one another, right? Because if you're told that you're fat and that is bad, then that makes you feel less safe in your body. And if you already don't feel safe in your body, then being told that you're fat also just compounds that.
Right. It's like a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
A vicious cycle. Yeah.
That sounds really painful. Where did it go from there?
So at this point, I guess we've talked about middle school and stuff. So yeah, around middle school, when I was 11, 12 years old, my father was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And so at this point, my mom, my sister, and I are living in New Jersey. My dad's still in the house in New York. But we ended up spending a lot of time that spring and summer in New York. And even my mom, like she was there, even though my parents were divorced, like she was very helpful in my dad's recovery because he had surgery and I guess treatments, and that was successful. She would do the grocery shopping, and then at that point, somewhere along these lines, I started to develop an interest in food and like actually cooking. So sometimes like I would help prepare food, but it's like right around this time, like this is also right around this time that I started having my period and like my body was changing, maturing, and all of that. It was right around that time like my dad started criticizing my eating habits or my yeah, pretty much my size, my body, like my double chin. He would say some very hurtful things. And like I remember a couple of times crying, like locking myself in the bathroom and crying, but locking myself away to like keep myself, like having actual physical boundary to like protect myself from that. But it was from then like I really started to feel like I wasn't good enough or like my body wasn't good enough. I mean, I think I already felt like I wasn't good enough just as a human being or as a daughter. So now this is like an extra layer. Yeah. Like, ooh, okay, let me keep it together.
Oh, no.
This stuff, like I've spent years, in therapy, like processing all this stuff. But sometimes when I bring up the story, and I hope that I'm still not operating from, the story. I mean, that's yeah. But even when I like bring it up, it's still, it's a little, yeah, it gets emotional.
Well, it's trauma. It's really traumatic. And I think even thinking back on trauma years later after processing in therapy, sometimes it can really like sneak up on you, those feelings.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Like I had a recent moment of just like boo-hooing about
Mm.
I shouldn't laugh. That's like a nervous laugh, but so I just remember boo-hooing about rehashing my story. And it's interesting because I've had issues as an adult with depression and anxiety. And I'm sure like looking back as a child, like I had it then. but like now I have the language and the tools and the support that I need to manage and deal with it.
I can totally empathize with that, having had depression and anxiety as a kid and having no reference point for it or understanding of it. And like just being like, why am I so sad and angry all the time? Like life sucks. Nobody really helping me pinpoint it.
People looking from the outside looking in, they would not assume that that was what was going on. Like I had mental health issues. Like people would tell me this as like when I'm an adult, because I have no problem sharing stuff and like talking about my mental health journey. And people like, I never knew. But I think it was the same thing like as a kid. I don't know if people noticed or, we had that idyllic picture of this family unit before my parents divorced. And even afterwards, it's like things still were pretty good on paper. But that wasn't the case. Fast forward a little bit. Now we're at the point where I'm a teenager and considering my career path. So when I was, middle school, high school, around that time, that's when like Emerald Lagasse was big on Food Network, Bobby Flay and Sarah Moulton and all those people. And I used to watch Food Network like every day. And I would like print out recipes from online. And like my mom would, like she was very supportive in that regard. Like she would, get the groceries that I needed to cook. And so like that kind of became one of my responsibilities or chores was to cook dinner because my mom was still, she was a single parent and like oftentimes she worked in the evenings, she taught evening classes. And so my sister and I were kind of latchkey kids, but like I ended up cooking more and more. And I remember being in the kitchen and pretending I had my own cooking show and I would be talking and like I still had this love of food and cooking despite my body size, despite whatever issues with food, whatever. Like I always like loved food. And so like that was my dream. I was like, I want to go to culinary school and I want to become a chef and I want to have my own cooking show on the Food Network.
I love that dream.
Yeah, I love it too. I love it too. But so like all people with a dream, no, I ended up studying nutrition and dietetics. Nutrition and dietetics instead. I did come from this academic family in particular. Like my mom was a professor. And also like my parents were 40 years old when I was born. So they're just a different generation. And for them, it was, you go to college, you get your degree, you get a good government job and, with a pension and other benefits and stuff like that. Like that was the goal. And I think, my mom, I think she was very well intentioned and I was an obedient child. So I ended up I chose nutrition. Did I really choose it? I don't, but I chose it because I was like, well, maybe it's close. It's close enough to, it's related to food and it's close to culinary. And so then the reason that I got into dietetics is because I went to Howard University for undergrad and they have a very small nutrition program that I swear people don't know it even exists. But what's great about that program is that they did have a coordinated dietetics program. So they had the dietetics program, there was a pre-medical and pre-dental and a community nutrition track that we could have chosen from. So I remember meeting with my academic advisor, or at least the woman who would become my academic advisor, like during freshman orientation week. Yeah, I met with her and my mom. My mom and I like met with professor and academic advisor, and she was a dietitian. And she explained how, like, after the 4 years and doing this coordinated program, I could sit for the registration exam so I could become an RD as soon as I graduated. And then I could get pretty much any job in nutrition. My mom was like, that's what you're going to do. So that's what I ended up doing. It was more practical than, going to culinary school and working a manual, like, labor job, standing on your feet.
And line cook kind of job that's like you get yelled at all the time and have to deal with the trauma of a kitchen sometimes.
Right. My mom was like, you don't want that. You don't want to stand on your feet. And the truth is, now that I know more, it's low paying often, at least for the people in the back of the house. The hours aren't great when everyone else is spending time with their family on holidays, like or Mother's Day or Valentine's Day. It's like you're often in the kitchen. So I get that now as the older person. But I didn't get it, necessarily get it then. But I ended up studying nutrition and dietetics instead.
What was that like for you when you started studying nutrition and dietetics? Were you sort of acutely aware that like it wasn't what you really wanted to be doing, or did you end up kind of throwing yourself into it?
Yeah, I definitely threw myself into it. I always have loved learning and loved reading, and excelled. So the actual study of nutrition, science of nutrition was still like fascinating to me. Oh wait, I think I should backtrack though, because another reason why I didn't mention it, but one of the motivations, like besides, nutrition being close to culinary or dealing with food, another justification is like, how you go through all these like justifications when you're settling for something
Totally.
other than what you want. So I was like, well, in my family, cardiovascular disease, hypertension is a big thing, and there's diabetes. So I was like, well, maybe I can help my family by learning more about the science of nutrition, how that impacts chronic health conditions. But I think another motivation underneath all of that was maybe I could fix what is wrong with me. Like the going back to the stuff with my dad and not feeling like I was good enough and my body, like all of that stuff. I was like, okay, well now I'll have the tools to like fix myself. So studying, like, yes, I excelled academically and I love the science of nutrition, but then also was like trying to figure out ways like, okay, well, how can I change my body, shape or size, my weight? And I think at a certain point, my relationship with food definitely kind of got messed up during those 4 years. So my sophomore year, all of my classes pretty much at this point were nutrition and dietetics courses. Actually, in the fall semester of my sophomore year, I went through a traumatic experience. I didn't realize it was trauma. I didn't have the language then, but it like profoundly changed like the rest of my college experience. Like I missed out on a lot. I had a lot of anxiety and avoidance, and definitely withdrew from the social scene. I like withdrew into like my studies, withdrew into like I think studying the food and nutrition. Actually, now like practicing. I moved into a dorm that was off campus, so then I had to like prepare my own food instead of like having a meal plan. And like at this point, it's like where I really started to try to. I think this is where some orthorexia or symptoms of that, or some really interesting, to say the least, habits around food and eating started to occur. And like now I'm like realizing it, 15 years later, like, oh, I was using food and whatever exercise habits that I had to like cope with the traumatic experience that I went through. And then I also ended up in the spring semester getting into a relationship with someone I was with ended up being together with 4.5 years. So it's like I withdrew into like those spaces to deal with everything, as successful or unsuccessful as it may have seemed.
Right. Those coping mechanisms were just the best you had at the time, which is like
Right.
so understandable. And I think probably most people listening can relate to that too, that like you learn later down the line, it's not the best outcome and there's lots of unintended consequences. But at the time, it does help address whatever needs addressing in your life.
Right. Right. I should also mention, like, because I moved off to this dorm that was off campus, didn't have a meal plan. I ended up just eating less. It wasn't intentional, but I was just eating less. I mean, I don't ever remember hunger. Like, I would still eat, but just I was not eating as much as I did when I had a meal plan. And then there was a shuttle that would go back and forth from the dorm to campus, but it didn't run as often as would have been helpful. So I just realized it was much easier to just walk to campus back and forth. And so like I ended up losing like a significant amount of weight. And I didn't notice, I didn't have a scale, but like my clothes fit differently. And I didn't realize until I went home for the Thanksgiving break, like weighed myself when I still like weighed myself. But don't do it now, because that would send me into like, it's just no bueno. But but I did then, and like I realized like, oh, I've lost weight, and now I'm studying more nutrition and stuff. So when I came back, I still like, I don't think I paid much attention to. I didn't change much about my eating and physical activity until I went home for the Christmas break, and I think just I weight cycled. So it's like you lose weight, and then now I'm back home and eating all the holiday food fare and all that kind of stuff. So I know I gained some weight back. So I realized like I stepped on a scale probably before I went back to school for the spring semester. So then at that point, it's like when I really started doing stuff like, I mean, this is when I started to play around with vegetarianism and veganism. And for me, like that was just a way to restrict. Or I remember at the time, like at family style restaurants where you have the meal deals. So I would go out to eat like on a Saturday, and I would get an appetizer, an entree, and dessert, and drink whatever, eat whatever I wanted, because I'm still like all about food and pleasure. But then like the next day, all I would do, like I would lay in my dorm room in the dark. And then also there was a yoga studio not too far. I mean, it was, yeah, not too far from my dorm. And they offer like a free belly dance class for first time students. So I started with the belly dance, and then they had the yoga and Pilates. And so I started doing all those things. And then for me, it was just, I guess I would tell myself it was about wellness, but it was more about like weight loss or, losing what I had gained over the winter break. And then also to get to like my goals. Because at this point, now I know about BMI, and I knew that I was the O word. I was the O word. And I was like, but I have to get within my BMI within the. And yeah, it's like, if I'm going to be a dietitian, like this is what I need to look like. So like the rest of my time in college was just doing things to try to fit within the parameters, or at least the weight parameters, what a dietitian is supposed to be. Like in my senior year, I ended up training for and running a marathon. And like that, the motivation behind that was weight loss. I mean, of course, it had a good cause, and I raised money for the Whitman Walker Clinic, which provided, HIV services. Like it was the largest provider of HIV services in the DC area. But the motivation underneath it was like, okay, I want to lose weight. Just like with weight loss, it was up and down cycling like throughout those years.
It's so upsetting how nutrition and the study of dietetics takes people there so reliably. And especially if you came in with this idea that your body was too big and that it was a problem to begin with, I feel like it's inevitable that it would take you down that path of weight cycling. And it's so insidious because it sounds like you really weren't, even though in the beginning you had this idea in the back of your mind from your dad's criticism and the criticism you'd gotten over the years that your body was too big, there wasn't really like a concerted effort or like behaviors that you did to try to change it. And your relationship with food was maybe a little complicated, but it wasn't like it turned out to be in college. Like that sounds like it's where it really kind of became super disordered.
Right. And now this like just reminds me of the time, because now that I'm vegan and like that limited my options, especially like this is the early mid 2000s. And, plant-based eating was not as popular as it is now. So there weren't as many options. And so I just remember crying, having meltdowns at restaurants because there was nothing for me to eat. And that is just no way to live. Like now that now I'm like, that is no way. Yeah, that is no way to live. But yeah, it was definitely a lot of anxiety and stuff around food, which is a mess. But one thing, is interesting. So I went to a historically Black university, and it was interesting when I think about I wonder if I think that some of the pressures that I had was more so for maybe the textbooks and like the actual study or like parameters of nutrition and dietetics, but I don't think I ever got any, let's say, like pushback or whatever from professors, because most of my professors were Black. Most of them were, now that I think about it, were probably in larger bodies, or they were not the stereotypical, like when you think of a dietitian, you often think of a thin white woman. And those weren't my professors, and that wasn't necessarily my classmates either, which was, just very interesting. It wasn't until I got to grad school. So I went to Columbia for grad school. And then it was like a culture shock. I go from being like in a situation where I'm in the majority to now being a minority. And then now I think there was even more pressure at that point to look a certain way.
From the other students as well, and the professors too.
And I still wonder, probably wasn't ever explicitly stated. It's just, we're all swimming in the stew. It's like you just get it. You get it.
You pick up those flavors. Yeah. I feel you on that. I think my experience in grad school was because I went back to school for my master's and also to do my DPD program, which is like the undergraduate or graduate program in dietetics. Is basically what everyone has to take to become a dietitian. So I was doing this program at age 28 or whatever with 18-year-olds, people who had just come to college. So that was a culture shock, but also very much felt that pressure and that same kind of unspoken rule, like you're supposed to look like this. And I went to NYU. It was pretty white, and I didn't feel the sort of pressure of being an outsider based on my race, but I definitely felt the pressure of like, okay, we all look like this, or we're supposed to look like this, and we're supposed to eat like this. And yeah, nobody really said it. Nobody really was like, this is what a dietitian needs to weigh, or this is what a dietitian needs to eat. But there was a lot of just sort of subtle policing of each other's plates, like people kind of glancing around side-eyed, like, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that piece about like this is how people are supposed to eat. That was definitely a new thing for me, but I do remember seeing how my classmates would eat, and yeah, feeling this pressure that I should eat like that. Because despite everything, like, well, at a certain point, I think, like, probably around my senior year, like after I did that, after I ran the marathon, I think I probably started to push back, at least against the vegetarianism, veganism stuff. For me, like that was too much. And I was like, I miss bacon, and I miss pesto, and cheese, and like things like that.
And your culinary pleasure side like had to fit against it. It sounds
Right.
like you're like,
Yeah. So I
no.
started to push back. And so now my classmates, I see a lot of them were maybe vegetarians and like were eating salads and sandwiches with no fat on them and stuff like that. I'm like, this, I don't know. That, yeah, it definitely got the pressure. But I guess the good thing about it is not like, I mean, I was a commuter and I spent like very little time. Like I was kind of get in, get out, go to class. And unlike most of my classmates, I hadn't taken my registration exam yet. I did take it during my first year of grad school, but I was already a dietitian. And I don't know, like I just never got too sucked in, too sucked into that environment, which I think was protective.
Yeah, that's really fortunate. It sounds like having had that sort of backlash already going in, where it was like you just had restricted a lot already and kind of knew that your soul wasn't into it. Like,
Right, right. But then at this point, so now, like after my first year of grad school, I sat for the exam like in the spring semester. And then over the summer, I ended up getting my first full-time job as a dietitian. So I worked at a women's health center for women living with HIV. And I think that professionally, like that's where I started to get a lot of pushback about my size. And at this particular place, like we served breakfast and lunch. So sometimes I would sit in the cafeteria with clients and I would eat, but then people would be observing and commenting on on what I was eating, or people would observe and comment on my size. And also, like I think right around then, I started doing Weight Watchers with my mom and my sister, and the same kind of meltdowns and stuff that I was having in undergrad, that kind of, I don't even know what's the word to, but the craziness started. And it was very short lived that I was like, it was maybe 3 months that I was on Weight Watchers, but it was definitely like very harmful for me. Like I remember stepping on, like weighing myself like times a day. I remember trying to be confined to this point system. Definitely messed me up. I remember being hungry all the time, but then my clients would comment if my clothes were fitting differently and I had lost weight. There's this positive feedback about it, but then I'm like an emotional, an emotional wreck.
yeah, it sounds like the restriction really got to you, like at an emotional, mental level. You just couldn't deal with it, which is so understandable and normal. And probably a lot of people listening also have had that experience.
Right. It's no good. No good.
Did that sort of kick off more disordered eating for you with Weight Watchers? Because you said you were only on it for about 3 months. Like after you stopped, did you kind of keep going with diety behaviors?
I think at that point, like that was the final straw for like that disordered eating. So also around the same time, like I feel like there's always like and another thing, like and another thing. This is what happened after that. So but also like now I'm in my second year of grad school, and I was working full time at this job at that women's health center. But in this short period of time, like right around then for like the next year and a half, like talk about a lot of trauma or a lot of grief happened. It was like I was in that my long-term relationship with my college sweetheart, like that ended. Actually, no, like first it was my aunt passed away. One of my aunt passed, yeah, she passed away. Then my grandmother passed away. And I was also the job where I was working was very toxic. It was a toxic environment and like stressful. I started having panic attacks. And I had like my first panic attack at the job. And then after my grandmother passed away, like I came back from her funeral and then I was let go from that job. And like so like all this stuff happened like back to back to back. And so like I ended up going through a mental health crisis. I mean, I was having the panic attacks, but I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. Eventually I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. Like school fell apart. I had to sit out. I sat out for a year. So it was a 2-year program, but it took me 5 years to eventually finish because I sat out for a year, came back for a semester, sat out again for like another semester, and then finally just went ahead and finished like my thesis. So I guess for me, like the mental health concerns were more important than my weight or my eating. Like, so yeah, the dieting habits that just ceased. But also, thankfully, around that same time, I learned about health at every size. So I finished my master's in May of 2012. So it must have been 2000 that fall that I first learned about health at every size. And I actually like looked at my Amazon history. I remember it was December 11th, 2011. I actually bought the Linda Bacon's book. That changed my life. And actually my master's thesis was I used health at every size as like the theoretical background or like the framework for my thesis. And like that was very healing for me personally. And like ever since then, that has like influenced my work as a dietitian.
That's so incredible.
Yeah. Since then, there hasn't been. I mean, I think I still have. I mean, still, we talked earlier about like swimming in the stew. Like sometimes I do get impacted by like fat phobia. And like if I do step on a scale, like I did like maybe a couple of weeks ago, and that kind of put me in a bit of a tailspin. And I was like, well, maybe I should, like, still like sometimes it's hard to not fall back on, those like diety or fat phobic notions or to like get lulled into like the promise of what weight loss would bring. But I always have to, like, whenever those thoughts come up, I have to tell myself, okay, this is bullshit. This is not true. Like, this doesn't mean anything. I really have to talk myself down or away from that line of thinking. But it's hard. It can be hard at times. I think most of the time I'm an intuitive eater. Most of the time I'm pretty good. I've like come a long way in my own mental health journey. Like I still go to therapy. I've done a lot of work to get to the place where I am. So I'm thankful for that. But sometimes it is still a little difficult.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just such a testament to like the strength and sort of entrenchedness of diet culture that even someone like you who's done all of this work, who's known about health at every size for this long, who's been practicing letting go of those beliefs for such a long time, like still gets caught up in it. And it is so hard, especially having to deal with weight stigma, especially like living in a larger body in this world is extremely, extremely difficult. And it would take like I don't even know what it would take, like a suit of armor or something to not be affected by it, And so like any human, of course, is going to have those moments of being affected by it. It's just that much harder to avoid the larger you are on the weight spectrum because that's how our culture is right now.
Right, right. What I'm very like grateful for is like I follow a lot of Instagram, social media can be a shitty place, but it can also be a wonderful place. And I follow a lot of like fat activists and plus size models and like people who are doing the work. And it's like whenever I feel some type of way about my own body, I can like scroll my Instagram. Like I also like I regularly follow and unfollow people. Like if I see anybody like who has like before and after like weight loss images and stuff, I'm like, okay, I can't do that. But
Yeah,
but
you're
like
out.
when I see like right, but when I see other, especially Black women taking up space, and I see the beauty in them, like it's easy for me to like, okay, I can see the beauty in myself, which I think I'm like so grateful for. Yeah, all these people who are just doing the work.
That's the power of community. I do think that is so important for this work is like seeing yourself represented and seeing bodies like yours or bodies larger than yours, with people taking up space and enjoying life and not fighting to shrink themselves.
Right.
Because we're so inundated with pictures and images of people who are doing the opposite. Like the before and after photo trope is like the most common thing. And the thinness, thinness as beauty trope that's the water we're swimming in. That's like, what it always is. So to be able to feel yourself have your own sense of value and beauty and worth and just like neutrality, even about your body, I think takes so much counter programming and counter messaging in the form of exposure to those images.
Right. Yeah.
I'm curious to hear like how this development in your own relationship with food and your body through discovering Haze and reading that book and like starting to work with that philosophy in your work, how that influenced your career path and sort of where you went from there in your life.
Okay. Let me just say, it's just been difficult. It's been a difficult journey in general, but it's also been difficult to try to do health at every size work in the dietetics field because employers and even, a lot of patients and clients have this expectation of what a dietitian is supposed to do. And a lot of dietetics is still very, weight focused. And yeah, so like I think about in my jobs, like I've tried to use health at every size principles, but it's just difficult to implement those things. And I honestly feel like, there are very few places, like maybe in some eating disorder recovery programs, Haze and intuitive eating is used, but like in the general sense, like I feel like the only way for me to do the work that I want to do is like if I'm doing my own thing, if I go into private practice, because it's difficult. So I've had my regular jobs, which I could talk about the instability. So I graduated from college in 2007. So this is right before the recession. I was actually reading an article today that was talking about there's all these stereotypes about millennials and the okay boomer thing. But this article was written about, like, it was about older millennials, like zennials. I guess that's me.
That's me. Yep.
Yeah. Like we graduated right in the midst of, like, we were in our mid 20s or 30s during this recession. And it's been marked with instability. My whole career has definitely been marked by instability. So I've worked in the community, and there's always like the risk of losing funding, which has happened, or
It's like you're grant funded for a year or something, and then they cut your position or whatever.
right. And that has happened more times than not. And then you add that instability to like being a fat Black woman in this profession. And then I've had a lot of pushback from clients, a lot of pushback. Like that wasn't just that first job at the Women's Health Center. It was like my whole career. It's definitely been challenging. And so there were a couple of times like I was laid off from a job in 2013. I actually had the option to stay at this job, stay on as a consultant, like work 2 days a week with no benefits and all of that. And I'm like, I can't afford to do this. And like, so I ended up just taking taking my severance package and getting unemployment. And I ended up staying away from I didn't work for as a dietitian for 2 years. And for me, like there were a couple of times, like especially every time it's when I'm supposed to recertify, the 5-year period, each of those times I'm like, F this, I don't want to do this anymore. Like not what this is not what I really wanted to do anyway. And it's so hard to do the type of work that I want to do. And I'm tired of the pushback. It was just an unhealthy space to be in for me. And I remember like in that 2-year time frame, like even though I was broke as hell, I moved back in with my mom. I was like, this is better. And this is it was a healing thing for me to be outside of the profession. It was helpful with my own relationship with my body and like just being okay with being in my skin. But then at a certain point, I was like, okay, I need money. So I ended up like getting a job as a dietitian. Like it was just a per diem job at a hospital. And here, this is like the first time in my whole career that I've worked with other dietitians. Like every place I've worked, I've always been the only one. I was the only Black dietitian, the only plus size woman. And I just felt like I remember feeling so uncomfortable being around the team, feeling like I didn't belong. And it was more so because of my size than anything else. But I'm forgetting, like even before then. So one of the reasons why I waited so long to go back, because I was like, yes, I'm like, F this. But also I'd actually interviewed for a job. This was another job with another community program, no benefits. The pay wasn't that great, but I'm like, I need a job, right? And so I interviewed for this job, and the first interview went really well. So then maybe like a couple of days later, I had a phone interview, like second follow-up phone interview with one of the same women that I had interviewed with in person. And she ended up asking me all these, like, she asked me if I knew how to calculate the BMI, which is, like this is dietitian 101. But she was asking the assumption behind or underneath that question was like, well, if I knew how to calculate BMI, then I wouldn't be the size that I am. She also asked, had I ever tried to lose weight? This was a program for like it was preschoolers, but they also worked with parents. So she was like, well, how would I be able to help parents if they're trying to lose weight and, I look a certain way? And I remember just being kind of blown away by these questions. And I remember saying, I'm not going to lose weight for anybody, not for this job. And I tried to explain, like, I'm a health at every size practitioner, but like a lot of people don't even know what that is. A lot of people don't know Haze. And I'm like, so I don't know. I can't remember how the conversation ended, but I guess we agreed to talk later or follow up. And I remember her being like very syrupy sweet at the end. I remember that. But I'm like, you were just okay, let me not curse.
You're welcome to curse, but
Okay.
you can curse here.
Okay.
You probably wouldn't want it to curse her out, but
Right. So that conversation ended. And then like a couple of days later, well, actually I talked to my friend who's a lawyer and she explained to me that weight is not a protected category. I just, remember being so like upset about the line of questioning and like all of that. Like, is this okay? Like what the hell just happened?
right. And it feels like discrimination because it is, but it's like so
But it's acceptable.
infuriating that it's not. Yeah, exactly. That it's not a protected category, which it absolutely should be.
Yeah. Was it recently, I think, is it Washington State? Was it Washington State? They just passed something.
Yeah, I think it was. We'll have to
Thank goodness.
fact check. I know.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. And like Michigan, I think has something too.
Oh, awesome.
I think maybe it's Michigan that's the state, and then I forget. But
Okay. Well, this is great. I hope more and more.
yeah,
But I talked to my lawyer friend. There's nothing I could do. And like, even if I could do something, I wasn't going to fight for that position or whatever. So anyway, I just ended up calling them back and saying like, yeah, you can remove my application for consideration. And so it was a year passed before I applied for another job. I was like, I don't want to do this. So, but I finally did start. I started working again, but now I have become like the queen of quitting jobs. So I worked here in New Jersey. I worked at a clinic, one of the largest clinics for people with HIV and infectious diseases. I mean, I was there for less than 2 years, but I was just miserable. I was miserable. And I would just dread getting up in the morning and going to do this work.
was there more weight stigma in the job? Was it like people pushing back on you, clients pushing back on you again because of your size?
There was some of that. I also think that so I've always worked in communities of color. And I think on one hand, I think some people are very appreciative of having someone who looks like them work with them. But then also your credibility is questioned because of your size. So it's just interesting. But then also I think a lot of more so, I just think more about like my coworkers or other people, if people trying to lose weight, trying to dieting or wanting to talk to me about weight loss. I'm like, I don't want to talk about this shit. Like, this is not what I want to, this is not what I want to do. But overall, I just think like ultimately at a certain point, I was like, this is not like dietetics. I felt like this is not what I'm meant to do. So remember, I talked about my dream was to go to culinary school and become a chef. So I eventually, once I hit 32, I was like, I'm going to do everything I said I want to do that I haven't done that I said I wanted to. So I ended up just like Googling, what are the top culinary schools in New Jersey? Okay, this is the closest one to me. So I enrolled in a culinary program at my local community college, which is great. It was a lovely experience. So I started in September, and the next month I quit that job. I quit that job. But also I was working like 3 jobs. So I had my full-time job, I had a consultant gig, and I also had a per diem job at a hospital. So I quit that job, but I ended up quitting everything else and just focusing on culinary school, which was like, we had an exit dinner when I was finished. And I remember saying, like, I've gone to an HBCU, I went to an Ivy League for grad school, but like my experience at this community college, like in this culinary program was like one of the best educational experiences like I've ever had. We were a family, food is connection and it's love and it's all those things. And like, I mean, I'm just grateful that I got to have that opportunity. Like grateful to myself for actually going for what I really wanted. I finished the program in May, but
Yay.
but thank you. But before then, I had to do a culinary externship, and I ended up doing a fundraiser and going to Senegal to learn about. In culinary school, in most culinary schools, it's still very Eurocentric, very classical French cuisine. We had one class of international, like the international kitchen or international cuisine, But even in that class, it was all like, it was Belgian food and food from Spain, like Spanish, the Spanish food.
International from Europe, basically.
Right. It was like we had one day for all of Asia, and it was just pretty much Chinese food. And there's one day for like Creole, like French Creole cooking, like Louisiana cooking, but it was more like Cajun French food. So there's no focus on African food, South Asian food, foods from the Caribbean and South America. So I was like, I'm going to create, like, I'm going for the things that I want to go for. So I went to Senegal, completed my externship there. And while I was there, I let my registration status lapse because I'm like, F this, I don't want to do this anymore. I haven't worked as a dietitian in like over a year and a half or something at this point. But right at this time, like, not, I'm still engaged with several dietitians. I mean, I follow you and some other, dietitians, and there's all this conversation about health at every size and intuitive eating. And I just noticed that the conversation is the same type of people who are having this conversation. So the same reasons why I didn't want to continue in the field is like the same reason why I'm like, I need to be doing this work, because I've always worked in communities of color, and like Black folks, a lot of Hispanic folks, like, don't know about health at every size, don't know about that there's another way to do things. And I'm like, who better than me to be a part of this conversation and to like bring this work to, my community. So I paid to be reinstated. So here I am, back being a dietitian, but still a culinarian, ready for what's next.
Oh, I love that. It's so important to have multiple, to be able to bridge your background in a way that's fulfilling. And it sounds like, too, the sort of things that drove you away from the field of dietetics are the very things that we need more of. We need more representation of people of color, people who are fat, non-thin white women, basically. Like, we need the field to diversify if we ever want to hope for it to become less oppressive.
Right.
And it is so oppressive. It's so oppressive to people working in the field who are not thin white women. And it's also so oppressive to the people that we try to help as clients, because I think that white supremacy and that thin supremacy, which flows out of white supremacy, is so entrenched in this culture and in this field that it's never going to change unless we get people who can help challenge that. As a thin white woman dietitian, I also am very mindful that we have to challenge it from within too.
Right.
But it's going to take all of it.
Right. A whole paradigm shift.
Huge paradigm shift. Totally. So I'm curious, like, what is next for you then in terms of bridging these two worlds, this childhood love of cooking and the pleasure of food with the sort of now more political understanding of dietetics and bringing yourself and your body into the field as a way of fighting for justice, really.
So before I get into the answer, let's talk about your book.
Yes.
Your book. So, I've read it. I've read it twice now. And I just want to thank you, because after reading it the first time, like, I felt like, wow, there's like finally a space, because I didn't think that doing the health at every size intuitive eating work was possible. And like after reading it, I was like, wow, there is like absolutely a space for me to be in this profession and to do this work. I think like because I worked independently as a dietitian most of my jobs, like I didn't even know, and I wasn't connected. I haven't been a member of the academy in several years. I had never been to Fancy because it's cost prohibitive. So I felt like really alone. And now I'm like, look at all these, like this. I mean, your book was just amazing. Like so many points where I'm just like, wow, I can do this,
That's amazing. I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you. That was like one aim of the book too, is to help other dietitians and dietitians to be, or just health professionals in general, to like get a sense of of possibility and of like how they could get involved in this movement. So I'm so glad to hear that and so grateful that it resonated.
Thank you so much.
Oh my God. Yeah. I love that. And we so do need you and so many people like you and just people of all different walks of life to get in here and change this field. And it's interesting how like isolating it can be to do this work, especially like you said, you are sort of like often the only dietitian in an organization. And so I can imagine how you just don't sort of connect with other dietitians or other people doing the work, and having to face all that weight stigma in those jobs is just very demoralizing. So to kind of know that there is this world out there and that like there are other even, Black dietitians and fat Black dietitians like doing this work, which I mean, even when I wrote the book, I hadn't met you or like Christina Johnson or Ayana Habtemariam or any of the folks that I have now recently talked to and gotten to know that are doing this work and like helping to spread this message to their communities.
And like now I can feel like I'm connected. I wasn't connected with these ladies either, but like now I am. Ayana and I talk, and I got to meet. I went to a Fancy adjacent event.
Yes.
It wasn't an actual Fancy event, but so I got to meet Christina. And so, like, yeah, it's just really great for me. Once again, going back to social media, it's like, I know it could be shitty, but it's been great to be able to connect. And so, like, yeah, now I just feel like, okay, I can do the work that I want to do. I think the work that's wanted and needed in the world. For me, like, what's next is I will be starting a private practice. So it'll be virtual, and hopefully, I live in New Jersey. I'm in the Princeton area, and so the goal is to have a space, so a virtual and in-person practice in this area. And then also, like, one of the things that I'm fusing everything together with the dietetics and the culinary stuff and the social justice is a new project of mine. It's called Diasporadical Kitchen.
Sounds so good.
Yeah, I love the name. I love the name.
Such a good name.
I was like driving around on a Saturday night and I'm like, oh, I got it.
Ah.
I have a name.
I love those moments of insight where it's just like you're doing something else and you're like, oh, that's it.
Yes, right. Right. But Diasporadical Kitchen, so it's diaspora, so focusing on foods from the African diaspora. And my culinary dream is to eventually travel throughout the African continent. Like what I did in Senegal, learning about Senegalese cuisine, I want to travel throughout the continent and help just do my little part, because there are a lot of African chefs who are doing the work to put African food on the map. So I'd like to do my little part of showcasing foods from the diaspora. And then radical, because I want to be talking about fatphobia, dismantling these oppressive systems like fatphobia and white supremacy and healthism and ableism, like all of that. So, and then the kitchen part, because it's going to be a cooking show. Yeah. So actually, last year, I was just playing around. I did this leadership training program, and one of the results that came of that program was I filmed a couple of episodes of a cooking show, because that was the part of the full dream, the culinary dream, to have my own cooking show. But I didn't have a name, and it was really just, I'm testing this out. But I'm like, I want to do something different. So I want to bring on people as guests. And so we're going to be cooking foods from the African diaspora, or a fusion of, soul food and Caribbean, like a fusion of all of that. And then here we're having these liberating conversations. So yeah, so veronicagarnett.com and Diasporadical Kitchen, all these things are going to come together. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Oh God, I'm so excited for that. I love too that it's the culmination of your childhood dream, and that it brings in these lived experiences that you have and this knowledge that you have around health at every size and social justice, and the culinary piece of bringing African food and showcasing foods from the diaspora. It all just comes together so beautifully.
It took a minute, because when I finished my program in May, I felt like I was just floundering. I went through a depressive episode, and I'm like, what the F am I doing with my life? And I was a mess, but it was just all of a sudden things started to come together. I mean, reading your book, connecting with you, reading your book, all this stuff, it was just everything started to come together. So thank you again. But,
oh my God. Thank you. I'm tearing up over here. That means so much to me. I feel like you're going to do such amazing things, and these projects that you have going just sound so incredible. And I'm so grateful that I helped inspire that. So
yay.
Thank you. It's amazing. Well, so we'll link to your website so people can find you. And depending on when this comes out, you might have a landing page, or, just a little bit of information, or it might all be there. Who knows?
Yeah, I'm going to get my act together. I swear I'm going to get it together.
We'll talk offline about a date that this will drop, and then you can have a deadline in your mind to aim for.
Okay, perfect. I need that. Sometimes I need that like structure, that motivation, So,
Totally. I do too. I always need a deadline, or else I'm just like, okay, I'll get that to you never. Like,
right. Right.
oh, I love it. Well, thank you so much, Veronica. It's so much fun to talk with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful.
So that's our show. Thanks again so much to Veronica Garnett for joining us on this episode, and thanks to you for listening. If you're looking for some practical tips to help you get started on the anti-diet path, grab my free audio guide, 7 Simple Strategies for Finding Peace and Freedom with Food. Just go to christyharrison.com/strategies to get it. That's christyharrison.com/strategies. If you've gotten something out of this podcast, please help us reach more people who need to hear the anti-diet message by sharing this episode and subscribing to the pod on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform, whatever that may be. You can see all the places to do that at christyharrison.com/subscribe. That's christyharrison.com/subscribe. You can also leave us a nice rating and review in your podcast provider of choice, which is another way to help new listeners discover the show and is always so appreciated. To get full show notes from this episode, including all the resources we discussed, plus a full transcript, go to christyharrison.com/234. That's christyharrison.com/234. And to get the transcript, just scroll down to the bottom of the page and enter your email address. This episode of Food Psych was brought to you by my book, Anti-Diet: Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating, which is now available wherever books are sold. Just go to christyharrison.com/book to get it. A big thanks to our editor and sound engineer, Mike Lalonde, our community and content associate, Vinci Chue, and our administrative assistant, Julianne Watasik, for helping me out with all the moving parts that go into producing this show every week. Our album art was photographed by Abby Moore Photography and designed by Melissa Alam. Our theme song was written and performed by Carolyn Pennypacker Riggs. And I'm your host and producer, Christy Harrison. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay safe, and as always, stay psyched.